Good morning. Let me call the Mark Delegates Council meeting to order and welcome you all here on a chilly April afternoon. Nice to see a number of familiar faces and some new guests, so welcome to you all. Remind you that Mark is the way that 16 judicatories learn and decide how to act together on a few agreed upon local social concerns. I am Pat Coyle. I'm the board chair for Mark, and each month the Delegates Council meets and hears from a leader or representative of one of Cincinnati's religious judicatories. With us today we have the Reverend Joseph Folsenlogan. He's a Roman Catholic priest in the Society of Jesus, Jesuits. He's a commissioner on the Archdiocese Social Action Commission and a member of the Archdiocesan delegation to Mark. Father Folsenlogan will say a few words about the Jesuit ministries and then start us off with a offer of prayer. Father Joseph.
I know the real reason that I was asked to do this. It's a conspiracy of a group of people who don't want me taking pictures. I think when people hear the name Jesuits in this area, the two places that immediately come to mind are Xavier University and St. Xavier High School. There's a few others that might be aware of St. Xavier Church, a parish on the other side of downtown, and some people may even be aware that across the border in Clermont County is the Jesuit Spirituality Center at Milford. But what Peg asked me to do was to talk about some other Jesuit ministry in the Cincinnati area that might be much less familiar, but it's very important to our overall mission. I'm actually the director of the Claver Jesuit Ministry. It's a small urban ministry center located in the South Cumminsville area of Cincinnati. And I think it would be possible to sum up the ministry in two words: presence and partnership. The whole idea of starting this ministry about 12 years ago was to have a place where Jesuits would both live and work in a low-income area. And, Jesuits have the reputation for being tremendously goal-oriented. Their mandate was very different than Jesuit mandates usually are, because they were not told to do a specific project. Instead, they were told, move into the neighborhood and become good neighbors. Become active in a parish, but not a staff. And learn from people in the neighborhood and in the parish how you could work together with them on issues, on matters that are of importance to them. I was not one of the original group of 5 people who came. I came 3 years after that, and I was tremendously impressed with the work that people had done. It started in 2000, and you're well aware of what happened in the city in 2001, and the racial unrest that was part of that. And so one of the things that is very, very important is relationship with people in the community. And so we try in some way or another to meet small needs. For instance, every Tuesday afternoon since last fall is bus token distribution. And I started out trying to give each individual that came 10 bus tokens to get them back and forth to work for a week. The number kept growing and growing, and I cut it to 8, and then I cut it to 6. And now we're in the thing of every other week. But along with that, you begin to hear the stories of what's happening in people's lives. Actually I had 2 people show up in the last week with eviction notices. People who went to the ER and came back with a prescription where they couldn't even afford a $7 copay. And we can, give little bits of help. But what it does is, I continually feel embarrassed when we run out of resources. But that's what's happening in people's lives, and that it is a kind of solidarity, it's a sharing in the challenges that people in our neighborhoods face. The thing is, the issues that are causing these difficulties in people's lives are really the local manifestation of larger issues. And part of our ministry is to become engaged in those. Fairly obviously, we're so small that we wouldn't make much of an impact by ourselves. And so that's one of the reasons why I participate in a group like this, which commits itself to dealing with larger issues, and by pooling our resources and working together, we can have more of an impact. Yesterday, I was at the monthly meeting of the Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance, one of our member judicatories. And we had a guest come down from Dayton, a minister who is the president of the Ohio IMA. And what he is trying to do is to get the IMAs in Cleveland and Toledo and Youngstown and Akron, Columbus and Dayton and Cincinnati to really commit to being engaged not only in their local area, but also in a statewide group that could have more leverage. Last night I was at a meeting sponsored by the Social Justice Collaborative of parishes and social justice organizations in the greater Cincinnati area. And very similar to Mark, they usually identify 2 or 3 issues to work on. And this year it's immigration, it's the abolition of the death penalty, it's criminal justice reform, especially in terms of, as they put it, returning citizens. Tomorrow I'm going to be at a meeting sponsored by Amos, which is putting together a racial justice summit for May 4th. So I could continue the litany, but I think you get the idea. As one of my colleagues used to put it, we need to learn to walk with both feet. We need to have the foot of direct service, of involvement with the day-to-day issues of people's lives and the challenges that they face, and be shoulder to shoulder with them. But we also need to partner with larger entities who are really trying to address some of the systemic issues. So that's just a little glimpse. One final thing that I should say, this does not mean we're doing justice work and the educational institutions are not. Quite to the contrary. For instance, with St. in the area that I'm in, there are 3 or 4 different community organizations that will give you high praise of the Xavier High students who serve as big brothers, who bring food as part of the Thanksgiving drive, who just come and be with the kids at the gym, at the rec center, and things like that. And as a matter of fact, that kind of involvement of students is not just a nice little extra activity. And student involvement in service work is a graduation requirement. So, the educational institutions are part of that, but we also have our little area that we work on. And so let us pray. Gracious God, many of our judicatories use the image of a meal to make us aware of our relationship with you and with each other. And so we are very appreciative of the nourishment and the fellowship that we have together. But we are deeply conscious that there are many of our brothers and sisters in the human family who do not have a place at the table. And so as we enjoy your gifts, we ask you to open our eyes and ears and minds and hearts to notice the people who aren't at the table and to commit ourselves together to bringing them around the table with us. We ask this in your name. Amen. Amen.
We have some regular business to attend to here. You have received the minutes of the March Delegates Council meeting. Recall that we met and listened to Alice Skirts, the chair of the steering committee for the Homeless Families and Housing Stability Study, and Josh Spring, the executive director of the Greater Cincinnati Homeless Coalition. And the coalition sponsored the study with its recommendations. Mark participated on the steering committee and work groups along with many other organizations. The minutes went out for the last meeting, went out with the announcement for this meeting. Are there any additions or corrections you'd like to see to those minutes? If not, I'll accept a motion to approve those minutes. Is there a mail? So moved, seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, we have minutes. Now, you have your agenda in front of you for today's meeting. Is there any additions, corrections you would like to see for the meeting minutes? If not, I'll accept a motion to approve the agenda. So moved, second. Second, thank you. All in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, we have the minutes and the agenda taken care of. I'll now introduce mpeg4, our Mark Executive Director, who will have some comments and introduce our speakers.
Good afternoon. I see lots of new faces. Welcome. I wanted to just give a couple of updates. Many of you know that there have been many groups involved in trying to save the Anna Louise Inn and reduce the barriers to their funding so they can begin their development process of where they are located currently. I want to remind folks that there are two court cases going on. One in Common Pleas Court, where the Judge Nadel is ruling on that. All arguments have been heard. He's supposed to come out with a ruling soon, but he has stated that before. So we have no idea when that ruling will come out. And that's a court case where Western Southern is suing Cincinnati Union Bethel and the city of Cincinnati. Then the residents of Anna Louise Inn versus Western Southern is in federal court, and this is where a group of residents are suing Western Southern for defamation of character, and that has been given approval by the initial magistrate to go ahead. My guess is that will be a fairly lengthy process. Then I also, in our newsletter today, we talk a bit about House Bill 408 and Senate Bill 280. Mark has been up to Columbus to testify to oppose first House Bill 408, and probably will go back for a third time regarding Senate Bill 280. They're the same bills. They've just been introduced in the two different, in the Senate and in the House. And they changed the structure of the CMHA board with two additional appointments from the county. The bill has been written solely for Hamilton County. There are 79 other metropolitan housing authorities across Ohio, and this bill solely focuses on Hamilton County. So read the article carefully. I think you'll begin to understand why. It's based on public housing units. Currently, there are 5,000 in the city of Cincinnati, or 5,000 in Hamilton County, 88% within the city of Cincinnati, and the remainder in the county. There are additional 300 units that need to be built, and that is what all of this negotiation in the House and the Senate is about. So we are on the case, and it's a case I think we will probably lose in both the House and the Senate. In fact, we did lose in the House. It was a party line vote, and many organizations gave testimony, and I was glad we were there. Then the third issue has to do with I forgot. I forgot what the third issue was. Must not be that important. But anyway, welcome, and I would like to move into introducing Special Agent Pamela Matson, who then will introduce her colleague. I ran into Pamela Matson at a party and asked her what she did. And she said, Special Agent, FBI stands for. I go, what is it? She goes, FBI Special Agent. I go, oh, that's interesting. And so 3 days later, I'm back in the office, and I thought,
2 days later.
2 days later. 2 days later.
The truth squad.
Because she dealt with the issue of human trafficking, and our delegates at our fall planning conference identified that as an issue they wanted to know more about, and it does relate to immigration, and it does exist in our region here. So I got on the phone in 2 days, and she agreed to come, and we're especially lucky too to have their special victims specialist. There's victim specialists also come. Special Agent Pamela Matson was an officer in the U.S. Army prior to entering the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She entered on duty with the FBI in 1989. She has been involved in all types of investigations, including a long stint on the Oklahoma City bombing case. She has been assigned to FBI offices in Syracuse, New York, Detroit, and came to Cincinnati in 2007. She currently investigates complex financial crimes and civil rights cases, including human trafficking. We are fortunate to have her here today. I also wanted to lift up that I thought it was odd that she only gave me the title Special Agent FBI, and what I realized is that after asking a couple questions, is these folks travel around the country, depending on whatever the issue is or crisis is, so they can be pulled out of Cincinnati and off to another investigation that's prominent. So we're very fortunate to have them both here today. Agent Matson, you want to come up?
Here. I've been, as Peg said, I've been with the FBI since 1989. She didn't say, though, that I started when I was 12. But, would you do me a favor and do the ceremonial act of removing the lens cap from that projector right there? That way it might be better for you guys, easier for you to see the presentation. There you go. Thank you. And I'm not waiting for some emergency message from the president or anything, but I'm using this to keep time, make sure I don't go over. This is a very short amount of time to be talking about human trafficking, because there's a lot of information in this subject to talk about. And I'm going to try to move out of the way so you can see my presentation. Can everybody hear me away from the microphone? Okay. And I'll probably, well, I can't move away too far because I have to use the projector, so I have to move the projector. At any rate, what we're going to talk about today is just general information on human trafficking. What is human trafficking? And this, can you maybe push that cart forward just a tad bit? See how that works? Because I need to move this. All right, there we go. That should, let's see if that's okay. That's fine. That's good. Okay. We're just going to be talking about basics of human trafficking, how to identify victims, understanding how human trafficking affects victims, statutes used to prosecute human trafficking, and a little bit about non-government organizations and how they are involved in anti-human trafficking. What is human trafficking? It is, in fact, modern-day slavery. The United States Department of State estimates that 600 to 800,000 people are trafficked worldwide every year. And of that number, approximately 14 to 17,000 are trafficked inside the United States. Now that does not mean that they're necessarily, well, what that means is those are people who are brought into the United States from elsewhere. That does not even count the people who are U.S. citizens who can be victims of trafficking. A person does not have to cross a border to be a trafficking victim. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. More than 80% of the victims are women and children, and then about 70% of women and children are trafficked for sex, to coerce sex. Human trafficking is one of the largest criminal industries in the world now, second only to drug trafficking. And why is that? There's a lot of money to be made in human trafficking. A drug dealer can sell a rock of crack one time. A person who is trafficking a human, for instance, in sex trafficking, can sell that same product any number of times a day. And that's a really tragic thing about human trafficking, to think of someone being coerced into that sort of activity. Traffickers use fraud, force, and coercion, and I'll use those words over and over again because those are basic elements of at least the federal trafficking laws. A person has to be, coercion is probably the major one you should think about, but with labor trafficking, fraud and force also have to be involved. Okay. There are basically two types of sex trafficking, and this is sort of my definition. Two types of human trafficking. One is sex trafficking and one is labor trafficking. I also like to say that there's a third type, and that is domestic servitude. This is one of the categories that's sort of under the radar. We do probably have a lot of people in the United States who are being trafficked for domestic labor. We have the federal government enacted laws in 2000 called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and they specifically looked at laws that are for today's form of human trafficking, because we still have in effect a lot of the old slave laws after the abolition of slavery. One law called peonage is actually is indebted servitude. Those two are still covered under the old 13th Amendment laws. But these are two specific sex trafficking and labor trafficking statutes were passed under the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 also gave a lot of provisions for services for the victims, including some immigration. I'm at a loss for words. You're not the only one, so lost word. So we can help some of the victims of trafficking with their immigration status as well, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, and Linda may as well. So, okay. Who's trafficked? And you can see from this list, it's just about anyone could be a victim of trafficking. Primarily, the victim of trafficking is going to be vulnerable individuals who are uneducated and unskilled. They are also, but you can see it can be anyone, and I'll just tell you about a few cases. As I'm going along, I'll talk about a few cases. To illustrate the point of educated or illiterate, the very first case that I worked on here in Cincinnati was a husband and wife who were trafficked for labor. The husband had the equivalent of a master's, of an MBA, and the wife had an equivalent of a bachelor's. Well, they're both from India. She had the equivalent of a bachelor's degree. She was a school teacher, and he was brought here to help improve. He was brought here by a very prominent businessmen of the same ethnicity as him, from the same village as they came from in India, and that's usually how it goes, or often how it goes. He was brought here to help this man improve his businesses in the area, and he supposedly had all different types of businesses, but the first one the victim was going to work on was a restaurant. The first thing this man did was fire every other employee in the restaurant except the cook. So this man and his wife were by themselves running a restaurant day and night. They ended up working something on the order of 20 hours a day, having to go early in the morning, like 2 o'clock in the morning, to the market to get produce and clean the toilets, to, just everything, wait on tables. This case, interestingly enough, this particular case was going to be prosecuted by the Department of Justice, as the FBI's civil rights cases frequently are. I don't know if any of you know about how we work. We have the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Cincinnati, as most court districts have, and then the Department of Justice specializes in civil rights cases and how to prosecute them. So this particular case was going to be handled by the Department of Justice, and ultimately it was decided this case was a little unusual, although the prosecutor did feel that these two people were victims of trafficking. He felt that he would not be able to get a jury to convict the trafficker because of the education level of the victims, oddly enough. He did not feel that a jury would buy that these people were coerced into labor. And, the federal government, just like every law enforcement agency, has to go with, has to consider their resources. And if there's no point in trying a case that would be very long and very resource intensive when there was no hope really that that case was going to be, that individual was going to be convicted. So those victims were not made whole by a trial and a conviction of the trafficker, but what was done was for them, this is something we were talking about earlier. Law enforcement, when we investigate these cases, in my opinion, not all is lost if the individual can't be prosecuted, because we do have the ability to do a law enforcement certification for their immigration applications. In this particular case, the individuals there's two types of visas basically that we deal with and assist with the law enforcement certification. One is a T visa, which is specifically for victims of trafficking, and one is a U visa, which is for victims of a violent crime. These particular individuals ended up getting their U visa as a victim of a violent crime. So they also got many services, such as counseling and clothing, you name it. They were helped out by a lot of social service agencies because of their status as a victim in this case. One thing I did not say when I started, which I told Peg I was going to say, is that, let me kind of start all over here with one idea. You think of federal agencies, you think of immigration, and you think, oh my gosh, nobody wants to report anything to federal agencies if someone's illegal. And I want you to understand that someone's legal status becomes secondary if we believe they are a victim of human trafficking. Now what that means is, if someone comes to me and says that they've been abused or victimized by a trafficker, then their status is not even relevant to me, except from the standpoint that later I might have to help them with the visa certification. I look at their, the overall situation without regard to their immigration status. So I just want to make that very clear. I'll talk a little, if I get a second, I'll talk a little bit about what used to be called ICE, my federal counterpart, now called HSI, and why I think it's difficult for them to investigate these types of cases. But we'll do that if we have a little more time, if we have a little extra time. Here's a very important concept that a lot of people do not understand. This kind of relates to their immigration status that I was just talking about. Trafficking and smuggling are two completely different crimes. In smuggling, the person who is paying to be brought into the country and to cross an international border is involved for the crime of smuggling. The person who is paying to be brought into, let's talk about the United States specifically, that is a crime. The smuggler is committing, the smuggled person is committing a crime. Okay? But that's not to say that once that individual comes into the country, that they cannot then become a victim of trafficking. Does everybody understand that? They may agree to be smuggled in, but incur a debt that requires them, well, it doesn't require them, but causes the trafficker to traffic them and try to keep them to get paid back. So trafficking is a crime that is wherein the trafficker, the person who coerces the labor, uses force and fraud, they are the subject of the investigations in a trafficking case. The crime of trafficking is seen as a crime against a person, i.e. the trafficking victim, and the crime of smuggling is a crime against our border. Does anybody have any questions about that issue? Because that's really, really important, and I think that you can see that very often a person who is smuggled, which is in fact a crime, might later become a trafficking victim. Two entirely different things. So just because someone has been smuggled in, that does not make us want to say, oh, forget it, they were smuggled in, we're not going to do anything, we're not going to help out with that. Anyway, who are the traffickers? Just anybody can be a trafficker. People who are brought into human trafficking, they're factory workers, farm workers, in the commercial sex trade, adult entertainment, cleaning services, food services. We've seen a lot of that here, at least so we think, in Cincinnati, construction, and even street peddlers. And we can talk specifically about some of that a little bit later. And here's how the traffickers control their victims. They restrict their movement, debt bondage. Let me just talk about that debt bondage subject. There's one case that the FBI, well actually not the FBI, another federal ICE had, wherein a bunch of women were brought in from the Philippines to clean motels in actually either North or South Dakota, I don't remember which. But the thing that made that case really interesting is, although those women were aware that they were being abused and ultimately did seek out authorities, they were really afraid to make that contact because in the Philippines, they still have debtors' prisons. So the trafficker was going to say that they owed them money for bringing them over. So that idea of going to debtors' prison was a real threat to them. So the threat does not have to be physical. It does, it can be totally psychological, and that's one of the other things that the Trafficking Victims Protection Act brings about and emphasizes, is that coercion can come in many forms, such as the trafficker saying, I know where your children are, I know where your family lives, things like that. Okay, here's some of the myths and misconceptions about trafficking. The victim knew what he was getting into, and we kind of touched on that with the talking about smuggling versus trafficking. That's no excuse for the trafficker. It's not going to be a defense that anyone's going to be able to use, because despite the fact that someone may know they're being smuggled into the country, does not mean that they cannot still be a victim of trafficking, and that would still be prosecuted. Another thing I want to point out is that U.S. citizens can be victims of trafficking. Okay, you never had to leave your own little block. You can still be a victim of trafficking by never even leaving your city block, and believe me, there are a lot of cases like that.
Give us an example.
Well, let's say in a really urban area where someone may live in a really low-income housing area, and where we're seeing this a lot is with gangs. Street gangs are trafficking girls for sex, and then they make a lot of money out of it, and some say it's easier than trafficking drugs. So you do not have to be from outside the country to be a victim of trafficking. Another thing I want to point out is here, traffickers' actions are culturally appropriate. A lot of things that we consider not appropriate in our country, you know, are not the same in other countries. I did a presentation for, I got to be careful about what I'm saying here. I did a presentation for a group recently. It's a certain ethnic group, and in their country, trafficking was okay. I mean, domestic servitude specifically was okay. If a rich person could afford to buy another human being, that was okay. Okay, so bring that group to the United States. They have their own little community. Even though they all work out in public, you got to wonder how people learn about all the little cultural things that are not appropriate. But in this particular case, they were familiar with a woman of their same ethnic group who had been prosecuted for human trafficking in Michigan. And at the same time, the FBI was investigating her for healthcare fraud. And their attitude was that she just went to jail for the healthcare fraud, not the human trafficking. And really, just the opposite is true, because she barely got any time for the healthcare fraud, and she got 17 years for human trafficking, because she brought in 2 young girls, acted as if they were her relatives, promised the parents back home they were going to be going to school and receiving an education in the United States. They never went a day to school. She brought them and forced them to work unbelievable hours. Her husband sexually assaulted both of the girls. He went to jail for rape and for human trafficking. But this particular ethnic community was convinced that she had to have gone to jail for the healthcare fraud, not the human trafficking, because they just didn't really get. So I had to tell them, here in the United States, if you're under a certain age, you have to go to school. And if you see a young kid at home, here's one of the indicators of trafficking. You see a young child at home who's not going to school, that could be a real indicator of human trafficking, okay? Here in the United States, it's not okay to own another human being, nor is it okay to bring someone in and hold on to the documentation that they have, any immigration documentation they have. So I had to go through this. They didn't really, nobody had ever told them any of this stuff. So it was kind of a strange experience to talk about some of that stuff. I just want to mention very briefly the organization called End Slavery Cincinnati, and I'm only going to tell you what it is and why you need to know. End Slavery Cincinnati is an organization in Cincinnati. Its membership is comprised of various non-government organizations and also law enforcement who are, in the anti-trafficking movement, if you want to call it that. End Slavery Cincinnati, they receive funding from the government in some cases to provide training in the community and awareness of human trafficking. Their members also provide services to trafficking victims. When I first got here, I'm a founding member of End Slavery, and we have done a lot of training out in the community for police officers and groups like yourself. And when I first got here, most of the complaints about trafficking that I actually received through End Slavery. So they may come into contact with the victims before law enforcement does, and chances are very high that they would come into contact with the victims before law enforcement would. But they also have, this group also has connections with other organizations such as the Polaris Project, which I'll talk about in just a second, and numerous other organizations that provide services to the victims, most of all. And that's all I'm going to say about that. End Slavery Cincinnati has a sister organization in northern Kentucky called PATH, Persons Against the Trafficking of Humans, and we work together very closely. The head of PATH, the coordinator, is on the board of End Slavery and vice versa, so we work together very closely. Who investigates and prosecutes human trafficking? Just very briefly, it's part of the FBI's Civil Rights Program. It makes up about 25% of our cases, and that may not sound like a lot of cases. We have 54 field offices in the FBI. But these are extremely resource-intensive cases. It's not a matter of you coming up to me and saying, I'm a victim of trafficking. The investigations are extremely involved and require a lot of proof and corroboration of what the victims say in order to make it happen. It might involve surveillance for a long period of time, watching the trafficker and the activity that goes on in the location, and it might involve any number of things. So that doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot of cases. And I'm not going to talk about Ohio trafficking laws at all because I don't know anything about them. So, but you did say that the state of Ohio was slow into getting into the having trafficking law, anti-trafficking laws, and you're correct. We were the fourth from last state to have, trafficking laws with any meat to them. So, just like with the Trafficking Victims Protection Act on the civil side, on the federal side, excuse me, it took a while for agencies to become educated about the issue and to start using those laws and prosecuting cases. And it's the same way with the Ohio law. It's going to take a little while to get the local law enforcement population used to these laws, used to the concept of human trafficking. So it's not something that's going to happen overnight, but I think you can see clearly that we have people here in Cincinnati PD who are interested in the issue. I've done a lot of training, and actually we have some training coming up for Cincinnati PD. So we also have worked some cases together already. So it's out there, it's here in our community, but now everybody seems to be working on the issue, so we're very much moving forward. But I'm going to talk about just kind of a little funny thing. For any of you guys who are a little older, like my age or older, anybody remember what his real name is? Come on, I know somebody's going to come up with it. Ephraim Simplest Jr. I just thought I'd throw that in there for humor. Okay, this is a real case. This is in fact a case that we worked with Cincinnati PD. The way it came about was a little bit different because we got complaints about this case from a lot of different sources, and one of them was Cincinnati PD got a call to this location, which is a business, just about a dumping violation. And the officers in the district where this was, and I'm not going to talk too much about specifics about this case, I'm going to try to be general, but the officers in this district brought some city inspectors with them because they thought there might be some code violations if it related to dumping. And when they got there, this is the first thing that they saw. They came in the door, to the main door to the company, and on the left is this room. And what does this look like? What? Dormitory? And somewhat makeshift, right? Yep. Okay, more? Okay, can you tell anything about this photo? Maybe about this guy, anything, color of skin or anything like that. He looks like he might be Latino. And that was somewhat of an indicator for us. That's just the offices in the building. And anybody know what that is? Mahjong. And what would that be an indicator of? Asian individuals in the business. This is just part of the business, no big deal. Okay, so here's another room that was found. And what kind of thoughts would you have about this? What?
It's like warehousing people. His bed's on the floor.
Yeah, but that was not bad compared to the other ones, but well, what about how? Okay, there's only 3 in this room as compared to that bunk room where there were like 8 or 10.
So men and women?
Okay, that's a good one. And then also possibly hierarchy. The people who are supervising or whatever might have more privacy or whatever. Okay, this is just stuff. Okay, this I've used this slide. Well, you can't really tell, but there's a rice pot on the counter back there. And we went into this building at 2 o'clock in the morning, 1:30 in the morning, and that was warm. So we knew already that these people were working almost round the clock. Okay. What about that?
Locked in.
Locked in, can't leave. And close-up look at that. That's not going to be reopened anytime soon, is it? Okay. What about this? Any thoughts?
They never left this building, basically, everything was.
Yeah, that's a good one. But anything else? How about the coin operation? Okay, so either what could have been a trafficker is making money off of the people who work for him, or maybe there's a reward system in that maybe the person, if they act right, they get to wash their clothes. Shower, no big deal. Okay, this was kind of interesting. This is, you can't really see it very well, but this is a full-size commercial kitchen. And the company actually had a Chinese woman cooking dinner for all the employees pretty much around the clock. Some of the employees were Latino, and they told us after we went into this place, boy, I'll be glad not to have to eat Chinese for a while. In Spanish, of course. This is just the warehouse. This was a wholesale food supplier. Warehouse again. One thing of note about this warehouse is, not only did we find the beds in these bunk rooms, but some people would take their stuff and find a place to sleep on the floor among those stacks of boxes just to get some privacy. So we really had to look around to find everybody inside the building. Barred windows, just something else, and more. But those are all indicators, and I'm going to talk a little more specifically about those. And how are we doing? Okay, all right. I'll wrap it up because I'm getting near the end. Victims living and working victims living near their work site or on the work site, that's a huge indicator. And their working conditions, there can be a lot of things to consider with trafficking investigations. They may not have personal possessions. As you can see at this place, they did have a lot of their personal possessions. And that was one of the things that made it so odd for the city inspector. It seemed that there was really something wrong because city inspectors, you don't see that kind of stuff where people have a lot of personal possessions around where they work. They may not have their own papers. They may not have any idea about where they are or anything about the community that they're in.
Did this company have like a phony payroll system?
Well, let's just say some people were paid in cash and some weren't. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, labor trafficking indicators, physical security of the premises. Let me just say one thing really quick. There's a story that I've heard about a police officer, a woman that tells me the story was down in Houston. A police officer who had human trafficking training, and he had an area that he was normally responsible for on his shift. And this was an area where the houses were fairly close together, and there was an alley back behind the house. And not more than a few days after he had human trafficking training, he noticed this one house that he goes by all the time. He noticed that there was barbed wire around the house. And the barbed wire was, okay, let me get this correct. The barbed wire was turned in rather than out. So what does that tell you? Keeping them in. And then he noticed, after he circled around the block into the back alley, that at a certain time of the morning every day, about 20 mattresses would appear in the backyard up against the fence. So that was a case of trafficking where about 18 to 20 people were living in this tiny, tiny house. But just my point is just that just a little bit of understanding and knowledge and awareness of this issue can help you hopefully help some victims. I'm going to stop right here because I think I'm already going into Linda's time, but we'll cover a lot of this stuff while we're taking questions. So without further ado, my colleague Linda James is our victim specialist with the FBI. She's been with the FBI for 7 years, and she came to us with a master's degree from Xavier University and in criminal justice, and that's along with all the other degrees that she has. But Linda's going to talk a little bit about what she does with the FBI and victim services.
Thank you, Pam.
Yes, my name's Linda James, and I've been with the Bureau now almost 7 years. And I do work with Pam on human trafficking cases. And basically what my role is compared to an agent's is, of course, Pam is the investigator. She's the one that has to build the case and work to try to find the illegal activity that's going on. And in this case that you saw slides of, what my role involved in that case was I needed to coordinate all of the resources that we needed to be able to interview these individuals, which all turned out to be male. There were 14?
I think so.
14 men that were living in this warehouse, wholesale warehouse, and we basically, after a search was done in the middle of the night, we took those individuals to a motel that I made reservations for and coordinated with in another part of the city. And each one of those individuals then needed to be interviewed more than one time. And Pam coordinated other agents to come in, and over a period of 2 days, we interviewed them, provided them with not only food and proper clothing. We also found out that they were living in bed-bug infested environment. We had to get clothing for them. That's what we reached out to End Slavery, which Pam had talked about, because they are the non-organizational groups, non-governmental organizational groups in this city. And they were able to bring in medical care for these individuals. We brought in mental health treatment for these individuals. We provided them with basically every need that they ever needed during this 3-day period of time, and provided them with whatever services that we could to assist them during the investigation process while they were being interviewed. And then worked with them to try to get them into a place to live once the interview process was over. So,
Can I interrupt you for just 1 second? Linda mentioned a 2-day period where we were interviewing them. The statistics show in human trafficking investigations that it takes 7 interviews of a victim to get the full story. They are coerced to lie to law enforcement. So there's no way you can expect, as a private individual, or your expectations of law enforcement, to get the true story in one interview. So that's, Linda's work is so helpful with the case, because they help stabilize the victims while we're trying to determine if they're, victims.
yeah, and that takes a long period of time. And you can't keep an individual, awake over a 2 or 3 day period of time, 24 hours a day. They need to have their rest. Plus, they need to be able to trust you, and they need to be able to feel comfortable and secure. And that's one of the things that I did to be able to provide the agents the opportunity to be able to get this information out of them. So that's what a victim specialist role is within the Bureau, is to work with the agents to be able to provide services to victims of all different crimes. But and then in our position, we're able to go to other field offices to be able to assist on these human trafficking cases. Like I went down to Knoxville and helped them out over a week's period of time on another human trafficking case, and we did basically the same thing. We basically set up a command center, and this was a sex trafficking trade, where the one that Pam and I worked on was labor trafficking, but these were prostitutes, or women that were prostituted in the Tennessee area, that we had to work with, trying to interview them and build our trust with them. And it took many interviews with these women before we were finally able to gain their trust and assure them that we were there to help them. And in the end, we were able to get convictions on that case, and also get these women back to their homes wherever they wanted to go. We were able to put them on planes and give them back, or put them back into their family environments. So some are prosecuted successfully. Some of the cases work out really well. I feel like in this labor trafficking case, we did all that we could for these young men that were working 24 hours a day, 23 hours a day at this food processing plant. Not all of them went back. We were able to offer them what services that we could, but mostly to make them aware of the fact that they don't deserve to be treated like this, that they have human rights. And those are the type of cases. So
What about translations?
we are able to provide interpreters.
We use our own. We in that particular case, it takes a lot of planning to put together an operation like this. It's not a raid. That's a very negative connotation. But it takes a lot of resources to put together an operation like that. Part of it is getting the language resources, and we use our own. We don't want to use anybody else. So we brought people in from FBI headquarters and various FBI field offices who had the language skills.
So not only do the agents use their own interpreters, then the non-governmental agencies, like our social service providers that we work with, they also brought in their interpreters to be able to work with these men to be able to figure out what kind of services they're in need for. We used the Red Cross that brought in their volunteer nurses and doctors to give them medical treatments. They had interpreters. So we had plenty of people to help us with the communication barrier. And we had the same issue in Knoxville, too, on that case, where we had interpreters come. So it's part of the process, the protocol that you pull together. But one of the most important things, and I know we have the local police department here, is that if you come in contact with any individuals that you think may be able to or fall into these categories, we can help you with these visas, which could sometimes be a little overwhelming, to be able to offer these people some sort of relief to know that they're not going to be deported out of the country while this case is being investigated. So reach out to us. We'll do everything that we can to help. And for everyone else here, just keep your eyes open, and if you see something, report it, because you never know.
And I just brought up on the screen the number that we recommend that you contact if you think you have come across a trafficking situation. This is a national trafficking hotline, and I recommend this as opposed to the FBI. This national trafficking hotline is in DC. It's operated by an organization called the Polaris Project, and they actually have highly trained screeners who operate the phones and who can talk to either whoever's calling to report a possible trafficking situation. And then the organization has names and contact information for law enforcement locally. So basically, wherever the case may be, they can reach out. Like, they have my cell phone number, and they know if they have a case in Cincinnati, they can call me. And I'm sure there's also they also have contact with HSI and other.
Can you read that number?
Yes, 1-888-337-888.
Thank you very much. Any questions, Tiffany?
Tiffany Zentz, Presbytery, Cincinnati. I was curious, in the case of the trafficker, the labor trafficking issue, was he, or they, whomever, how did they respond? I mean, did you have to come in and just take them? Was there the trafficker there, and did they get scared? And
Well, in this particular case, we did the operation at a time when we thought almost everyone would be there, and the guy who we thought was a trafficker was there, and he did talk to me. He did not speak very good English, but I think that was kind of an act too. But a lot of ethnicities want to act like they don't understand our culture and our laws about things like this, but that's really not going to be a great excuse for them. But that's basically all I can say. This case actually is still ongoing, and just for your information, even what we determined in the few days that Linda was referring to after this operation was that they were not in fact victims of trafficking, and the reason is that all the Latino males who were the ones we thought were victims, most of them were from Central America, like Honduras or Guatemala, and they traveled all this way to the United States to get here for a job that they needed so badly that they were willing to work for what was the equivalent of about $2 an hour. We had a lot of other information that pointed to the idea that they were victims of trafficking, but honestly, it didn't pan out. They were more than willing, and they were not being coerced. They were willing to work for $2 an hour.
It was better conditions than where they came from, and that's the way they looked at it.
And
So
what
this
about the
company-
what about the trafficker?
Well, as I said, it's an ongoing investigation, so although we may not convict them of trafficking, we'll get them on something.
Are they still in business?
Yes, they are.
Other questions? Yes.
The women in the Tennessee case, were they all from one country or?
No, they were recruited from all over the country.
Wow.
And their recruitment was, their enticement or coercion basically was, they needed a job, and they would go to an individual who then would tell them that there was a job, and they would put them in a car and transport them to the Tennessee area, and then basically force them into the sex trafficking. But they were from all over.
Do you have any statistics on the greater Cincinnati area, knowing that 75 is this corridor?
Most of at least the child trafficking is in the Toledo area. As far as statistics, no. Ohio, as you know, is a really high center for child trafficking. And because of all the interstates that we have, the Toledo area, in the Toledo area specifically, we don't have statistics. I mean, I don't have any. I'm sorry, I don't. But let's just say this. The more that we go out and educate people and make people aware of this issue, the more calls I get, the more complaints I get, and I get 4 or 5 a month. So it is not nothing, so there's a lot of this going on.
This strikes me as being very expensive to bring all these people together, the translators. What are the budget constraints that you face? And do you have adequate resources?
Well, no, we don't. And that's a very good question, because I happen to be the only agent in the FBI, the Cincinnati FBI office, working on human trafficking. We have somebody in Dayton, and we have somebody in Cincinnati working on it too, but none of us do it full time. So if I come across a case, as the one we talked about earlier, where it requires a lot of resources, we were working a lot with Cincinnati PD on this case. And when we did the operation, they were heavily involved. And when we come across a case that needs action, or we say we need to start investigating a case, we think people are in danger, we basically have to take resources away from something else. I remember one case where we thought there were some Russian women being forced into prostitution, and we did surveillance for 3 or 4 weeks. And surveillance for not 24 hours, but any long period of surveillance takes a lot of bodies.